Every dawn, 12-year-old Ethan Miller guides 4 powerful horses through town on a route that baffles neighbors, carrying a devastating secret that would shatter his paralyzed father's fragile recovery if discovered. The small town of Pinewood Creek seemed to hold its breath as dawn broke over the Appalachian foothills. Most residents were still tucked in their beds, but 12-year-old Ethan Miller was already awake, his weathered boots crunching on the gravel path leading to his family's modest barn. The morning air carried a chill that made him pull his worn jacket tighter around his slender frame. Despite the early hour, determination shone in his eyes as he approached the 4 horses waiting patiently in their stalls. "Morning, Willow," he whispered to the dapple-gray mare, who nickered softly in response. "Ready for our day." His gentle hand stroked her muzzle as she pressed her large head against his chest in a familiar greeting. One by one, he greeted the others. Thunder, a powerful black stallion, Luna, a gentle palomino, and Scout, a spirited young chestnut gelding. The Miller family hadn't always struggled. Once they'd owned one of the most successful horse breeding operations in Jefferson County, but that was before the accident 2 years ago, before Ethan's father, Matthew Miller, had been thrown from Thunder during a storm, leaving him with a spinal injury that confined him to a wheelchair. Since then, keeping the remaining horses had become increasingly difficult, but Matthew refused to sell them. Their family, he'd insist, whenever Ethan's mother, Sarah, brought up their financial struggles. So every morning, rain or shine, Ethan took the horses out to graze in the community pasture on the other side of town. It was a responsibility he'd shouldered without complaint, despite having to wake up at 5 a.m. to complete the task before school. "You're up early again," his mother's tired voice came from the barn entrance. Sarah Miller looked older than her 38 years. Worry lines etched permanently around her eyes. She carried a thermos of hot chocolate and handed it to her son. "Can't let them stay cooped up," Ethan replied, taking a grateful sip. "Dad always says horses need to run." Sarah's eyes softened as she watched her son prepare the horses with practiced efficiency. "Most boys your age would be complaining about video games and sleep, not taking care of 4 horses before sunrise." Ethan shrugged, uncomfortable with the praise. "It's just what needs doing, Mom." What Sarah didn't mention, what the whole town had begun to whisper about, was the peculiar route Ethan took each day. Instead of using the direct trail behind their property that led straight to the community pasture, he insisted on taking the longer path through town. What should have been a 20-minute journey stretched into nearly an hour and a half. "You sure you don't want to take the back trail today?" Sarah asked, not for the first time. "And storms coming later, according to the weather report." "We'll be fine," Ethan replied, his voice carrying a firmness unusual for a boy his age. "The horses prefer this way." Sarah didn't argue further. She'd learned that her son's stubborn streak matched his father's, especially when it came to the horses. Across town, Eleanor Thompson, a retired school teacher and the self-appointed town observer, stood by her kitchen window with a cup of steaming coffee. At 82, she prided herself on knowing everyone's business in Pinewood Creek. For the past 6 months, she'd watched young Ethan Miller pass by her house with those magnificent horses, following the same route through the center of town instead of taking the logical path behind the properties. "There he goes again," she murmured to herself, checking her watch. "Right on schedule, 6:15 a.m. Her neighbor and longtime friend, Walter Jenkins, had been listening to her theories about the Miller boy for weeks. "Maybe the horses just enjoy the scenery," Walter had suggested jokingly during their last conversation. "Horses don't care about scenery," Eleanor had retorted. "That boy is up to something, and I intend to find out what." Little did she know that her curiosity would soon uncover a mystery that would change how the entire town viewed the quiet, determined boy with the 4 horses. As Ethan led the horses down Maple Street, the animals moved with a practiced rhythm, their hooves creating a soothing melody against the pavement. Scout occasionally nudged Ethan's shoulder playfully, making the boy smile despite his fatigue. "Just a little further," he assured them, checking his watch anxiously. He needed to maintain his precise schedule. Being late wasn't an option, not when there were people counting on him, people whose existence the town had all but forgotten. Thunder's ears perked up as they approached the first stop on their journey, a small blue house set back from the road. The curtains in the front window twitched slightly, and Ethan's pace slowed deliberately. What happened next would have surprised anyone watching, especially Eleanor Thompson, who had just decided that today would be the day she would follow the Miller boy and discover his secret once and for all. Eleanor Thompson had prepared for her mission with military precision. Her comfortable walking shoes were laced tight, a light raincoat was buttoned against the threatening clouds, and a pair of binoculars hung around her neck. Though she insisted to herself they were for birdwatching, not spying on a 12-year-old boy. She'd positioned herself behind the large oak tree at the corner of her property, waiting for Ethan and his horses to pass. "Right on time," she whispered, as the familiar clip-clop of hooves reached her ears. She gave them a 30-second head start before following, staying far enough behind to avoid detection, but close enough to keep them in sight. Ethan led the horses down Maple Street, past the town's small grocery store, still closed at this early hour, and the hardware shop where his father had once been a regular customer. Eleanor noticed how the boy walked with purpose, occasionally checking his watch as though on a strict schedule. When they reached the small blue house at the end of Maple Street, the old Winters place, Eleanor expected them to continue past. Instead, Ethan stopped, guiding the horses closer to the front window. Eleanor ducked behind a parked car, peering over the hood in confusion. The blue house belonged to Mr. Frank Winters, a Vietnam veteran who'd lost both legs in the war. Once active in community events, Frank had become increasingly reclusive after his wife passed away 5 years ago. Most people in town barely remembered he was still there. Eleanor watched as Ethan positioned the horses directly in front of Frank's window. To her astonishment, the curtains parted, revealing the weathered face of Frank Winters sitting in his wheelchair. A smile transformed his usually somber expression as Ethan guided Willow right up to the window. Frank placed his hand against the glass, and the horse gently pressed her muzzle to the same spot from the outside. Eleanor could see Frank's lips moving, though she couldn't hear what he was saying. Whatever it was made Ethan smile and nod in response. After a few minutes with Willow, Ethan brought Thunder, Luna, and Scout to the window, one by one. Each horse seemed to know exactly what to do, standing patiently as Frank reached out symbolically through the glass barrier. The joy on the old veteran's face was unmistakable, even from Eleanor's hidden vantage point. "Well, I'll be," she whispered to herself, lowering her binoculars. This was clearly a regular routine, the way the horses moved with practiced ease, the way Frank was waiting at the window, the comfortable familiarity between man, boy, and animals. After about 10 minutes, Ethan checked his watch again, said something to Frank, and began leading the horses away. Eleanor barely had time to duck behind the car before they moved on. Once they were a safe distance ahead, she continued her pursuit, more intrigued than ever. Back at the Miller home, Sarah was helping her husband into his wheelchair when the phone rang. She answered to find Jessica Chen, Ethan's science teacher, on the line. "Mrs. Miller, I wanted to check if Ethan is feeling better today. We missed him in yesterday's field trip planning session." Sarah frowned, confusion crossing her face. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Chen, but Ethan wasn't sick yesterday." He attended all his classes. There was an awkward pause on the line. Actually, Mrs. Miller, Ethan wasn't in my 6th period science class. His friend Tyler said he had to leave early for a doctor's appointment. Sarah's grip tightened on the phone. I see. Thank you for letting me know, Ms. Chen. I'll talk to Ethan about this. When she hung up, Matthew caught her troubled expression. What's wrong? Ethan skipped class yesterday, she said, rubbing her temple. He's never done that before. Matthew's brow furrowed. Maybe it has something to do with these morning routes he's been taking. He's been so secretive lately. I know, Sarah sighed. Sometimes I wonder if the responsibility of the horses is becoming too much for him. He's only 12, Matt. Matthew reached for his wife's hand. Our son is stronger than we give him credit for. Whatever's going on, we'll figure it out together. Meanwhile, Ethan and the horses had reached their second stop of the morning, a small, well-maintained house with a wraparound porch on Oak Ridge Avenue. Eleanor, still following at a distance, recognized it as belonging to Mrs. Abigail Henderson, an elderly widow who had taught piano to generations of Pinewood Creek children until arthritis had gnarled her once nimble fingers. Again, Ethan stopped the horses, this time lining them up along the white picket fence that bordered Mrs. Henderson's front yard. Eleanor was surprised to see the old woman already sitting on her porch, despite the early hour, wrapped in a thick blanket against the morning chill, her face lighting up as Ethan approached with the horses. Unlike Frank Winters, Mrs. Henderson could come outside, though Eleanor noticed she moved with painful slowness as she made her way down the porch steps, aided by a cane clutched in her twisted hand. "Good morning, my dears." Eleanor could hear Mrs. Henderson call out, her voice carrying in the quiet morning air. Right on schedule, as always. Ethan helped her to a garden bench positioned near the fence, where she could easily reach out to stroke Luna's golden mane. The elderly woman's face transformed as her gnarled fingers buried themselves in the horse's silky hair, years seeming to fall away from her features. "She's been waiting by the window since dawn," a voice behind Eleanor said, causing her to nearly jump out of her skin. She whirled around to find Walter Jenkins standing there, an amused expression on his face. "Goodness, Walter, you nearly gave me a heart attack," Eleanor hissed, clutching her chest. "What are you doing here?" "Same as you, I suspect," Walter replied with a knowing smile. "Trying to solve the mystery of Ethan Miller and his horses." Eleanor shot Walter an indignant look. "I am not spying. I'm conducting a community welfare check." Walter chuckled softly. "Of course you are. Just like you were conducting community research when you followed Pastor Richards to find out where he was going every Tuesday afternoon." "And that was different," Eleanor huffed. "And it turned out he was visiting his secret grandchild from his estranged daughter, so I was right to be concerned." They both fell silent as they watched Ethan helping Mrs. Henderson feed an apple to Scout. The woman's arthritic hands trembled, but the horse gently took the fruit from her palm, eliciting a delighted laugh that made her sound decades younger. "He's doing something special here, isn't he?" Walter said, his voice losing its teasing edge. Eleanor nodded, unexpected emotion tightening her throat. "I think these might be the only visitors some of these folks get." After about 15 minutes, Ethan checked his watch again and began preparing to leave. He helped Mrs. Henderson back to her porch, ensuring she was safely seated before returning to the horses. We should go before he sees us," Eleanor whispered, tugging at Walter's sleeve. They retreated around the corner, continuing their covert mission as Ethan led the horses toward their next destination. Dark clouds were gathering overhead, confirming Sarah Miller's earlier weather prediction. A storm was indeed approaching. "Do you think we should tell him we know?" Walter asked as they walked. Eleanor considered the question. Not yet. Let's see where else he goes. The third stop was the small assisted living facility at the edge of town. Unlike the previous visits, which seemed to be to individual homes, this appeared to be a scheduled visit to multiple residents. The facility manager, Diane Reynolds, was waiting at the side entrance, holding the gate open as Ethan approached with the horses. From their vantage point behind a large hedge, Eleanor and Walter watched as several elderly residents emerged or were wheeled out into the facility's garden area. Despite the threatening weather, their faces lit up at the sight of the 4 horses. "I've heard about therapeutic animal visits before," Walter commented, "but I've never seen it with horses." "Look at Mr. Grayson," Eleanor whispered, pointing to a man she recognized. Once the town's most successful lawyer, now suffering from advanced dementia. "I haven't seen him smile like that in years." Mr. Grayson, usually confused and agitated according to his family, was gently stroking Luna's nose, speaking to her in clear, coherent sentences. Other residents were similarly engaged, some feeding the horses treats provided by Diane, others simply enjoying the proximity to the magnificent animals. One woman in a wheelchair, who Eleanor recognized as the formerly vivacious Margaret Wilson, now largely paralyzed from a stroke, had tears streaming down her face as Thunder lowered his massive head to her level, allowing her to press her cheek against his. I had no idea this was happening right under our noses," Walter said, his own voice thick with emotion. Eleanor checked her watch. "It's already 7:30. Doesn't school start at 8:15? How is he managing all this?" As if answering her question, Diane glanced at her watch and nodded to Ethan. The boy began guiding the horses away from the residents, many of whom called out their thanks and goodbyes. It was clearly a well-orchestrated routine, with time constraints that everyone understood. Just as Ethan and the horses exited the facility grounds, the first fat raindrops began to fall. The brewing storm had arrived earlier than forecast. Ethan looked up at the darkening sky with concern, then down at his watch again. His face showed the first signs of worry they'd seen all morning. "He's not going to make it to the pasture and back before school at this rate," Walter observed. "Especially not if he has more stops to make," Eleanor added, pulling up her hood as the rain intensified. They followed as Ethan quickened his pace, leading the horses down Oak Street toward what they knew was the oldest part of town. The rain was coming down harder now, and Ethan had removed his jacket to drape it over Scout's head, the youngest horse clearly distressed by the sudden downpour. "That poor boy is going to be soaked through," Eleanor fretted, her earlier investigative zeal giving way to genuine concern. "Not to mention late for school," Walter added. The 4th stop was at a small, dilapidated house that Eleanor hadn't paid much attention to in years. It belonged to the Reeves brothers, Hank and Harold, twins in their 70s, who had become notorious recluses after returning from the Vietnam War. Most people in town avoided the brothers, uncomfortable with their gruff demeanor and the occasional shouting matches that could be heard from their property. To Eleanor and Walter's astonishment, both brothers were waiting on their sagging front porch, each holding a large umbrella. When they spotted Ethan and the horses approaching through the rain, Harold hurried down the path to help shield the boy, while Hank extended a tarp that had been prepared between 2 posts in their yard, creating a makeshift shelter for the horses. "Well, I never," Eleanor breathed, watching as the supposedly antisocial Reeves brothers efficiently helped Ethan guide the horses under the tarp. "It looks like young Ethan Miller has accomplished what the rest of the town gave up on decades ago," Walter remarked. "He's brought the Reeves brothers back into the community." Under the shelter of the tarp, the brothers were actually smiling as they patted the horses and spoke animatedly with Ethan. They seemed particularly fond of Thunder. the stallion standing patiently as Hank checked his legs and hooves with expert hands. Because they were cavalry in Vietnam, Walter remembered suddenly. Before their unit was ambushed, they lost most of their platoon and came back different. Eleanor nodded slowly, pieces falling into place. And now, Ethan's brought horses back into their lives. The rain continued to pour as Ethan checked his watch again, his expression now clearly anxious. School would start soon, and he was still only halfway through his route. Harold Reeves disappeared into the house and returned moments later with a towel, which he handed to Ethan. The boy gratefully dried his face and hair before pulling a small notebook from his pocket, protected in a plastic bag. Eleanor and Walter watched as Ethan consulted the notebook, then spoke urgently to the brothers, pointing first at his watch and then in the direction of his remaining route. The brothers nodded in understanding. After a brief discussion, Hank disappeared into a shed behind their house while Harold continued talking with Ethan. Through the curtain of rain, Eleanor and Walter couldn't hear their conversation, but the body language suggested a plan being formed. "What do you think they're doing?" Eleanor whispered, huddled with Walter under the inadequate shelter of a maple tree across the street. "I'm not sure, but wait, look there." Hank had emerged from the shed riding an old but well-maintained ATV. He pulled up alongside the tarp where Ethan and the horses waited. After another brief conversation, Ethan nodded and climbed onto the back of the ATV behind Hank. Harold must be staying with the horses, Walter deduced as the twins shook hands in what appeared to be agreement. But what about Ethan's other stops? Eleanor wondered. They got their answer as Hank and Ethan sped off down the street on the ATV, heading further into town through the pouring rain. "Quick! We need to follow them," Eleanor said, already moving despite the downpour. Walter grabbed her arm. "In this rain, on foot, we'll never keep up." Eleanor's determination faltered as she realized he was right. They watched the ATV disappear around a corner, taking Ethan with it. "Come on," Walter said. "Let's at least get out of this rain. The Moonlight Diner is just down the block. We can warm up and figure out our next move." Reluctantly, Eleanor agreed, and they hurried through the storm to the diner, arriving soaked despite their rain gear. The warmth inside was a welcome relief as they slid into a booth by the window, ordering coffee to thaw their chilled hands. "So much for solving the mystery," Eleanor sighed, looking out at the rain-slicked streets. "I think we've already learned a lot," Walter pointed out. "Ethan's been using these horses to bring joy to isolated people around town. That's pretty remarkable for a 12-year-old. The diner's bell jingled as the door opened, admitting another rain-soaked patron, Sarah Miller, Ethan's mother. She spotted Eleanor and Walter immediately. "Mrs. Thompson? Mr. Jenkins?" She greeted them, approaching their table. "Awful weather to be out in." "Indeed it is," Eleanor replied, gesturing to the empty seat across from them. "Would you care to join us?" Sarah hesitated, then nodded, sliding into the booth. "Thank you. I'm just waiting out the worst of it before heading to work." "At the veterinary clinic, right?" Walter asked. "Part-time," Sarah confirmed. "Between that and Matthew's disability benefits, we're getting by, barely." A waitress brought Sarah a coffee, and an awkward silence fell over the table. Eleanor and Walter exchanged a glance, both wondering if they should mention Ethan. Sarah broke the silence first. "Have either of you seen Ethan this morning, with the horses?" Eleanor nearly choked on her coffee. "What makes you ask that?" Sarah stirred her coffee slowly, just wondering. "This storm came in earlier than predicted. I'm worried about him." Walter cleared his throat. "Actually, we did see him. He seemed to be managing just fine." Relief washed over Sarah's face. "That's good to hear. That boy, he takes on so much responsibility." Eleanor could no longer contain herself. "Sarah, We know what Ethan's been doing with the horses every morning. Sarah's hand froze mid-stir, her expression unreadable. Oh, we followed him, Eleanor admitted. We saw him visiting Frank Winters, Abigail Henderson, the folks at Pinewood Assisted Living, even the Reeves brothers. Sarah's shoulders slumped, as if a weight had been partially lifted. So now you know. How long has this been going on? Walter asked gently. About 6 months, Sarah said, staring into her coffee. It started with Mr. Winters. Ethan was passing by his house with the horses one day and noticed him watching from the window. On impulse, he brought Willow closer. And, well, Mr. Winters smiled for the first time since his wife died, according to Ethan. And it grew from there, Eleanor prompted. Sarah nodded. One by one, Ethan discovered more people who were isolated, lonely, or struggling. He started planning his route to include them. Before I knew it, he had a whole schedule worked out. That explains the strict timing we observed, Walter said. Yes, he's meticulous about it. Each person gets exactly 15 minutes, starting at 6:15 with Mr. Winters and ending at the community pasture by 8 g, giving him just enough time to get to school. Eleanor leaned forward. But why keep it a secret? What he's doing is remarkable. Sarah's expression clouded. It's complicated. Matthew doesn't know. Your husband doesn't know. Eleanor couldn't hide her surprise. No, Sarah admitted, her voice dropping. Matthew still believes Ethan is simply taking the horses to graze. If he knew Ethan was visiting veterans like Mr. Winters and the Reeves brothers. I don't understand, Walter said. Sarah sighed deeply. After Matthew's accident, he fell into a deep depression. He was a decorated Army Ranger, used to being strong and capable. Now he feels like a burden. The thought of his son stepping up to fill roles that should be his, it would devastate him. Eleanor's heart ached for the family. But surely he'd be proud of Ethan. Of course he would, Sarah agreed, but he'd also see it as further proof of his own failure. Matthew's pride has taken enough hits. Ethan understands that better than anyone. Outside, the rain continued to fall in sheets. Eleanor glanced at her watch, 8:10 a.m. Ethan's going to be late for school. It wouldn't be the first time, Sarah admitted. His teacher called yesterday. He missed a class. Walter and Eleanor exchanged looks. Do you know why? Walter asked. Sarah hesitated, then seemed to decide to trust them. Mrs. Henderson fell last week. Ethan found out she was in the hospital and skipped science class to visit her. He brought her a recording he'd made of the horses, their nickering and snorting. The nurses said it was the first time she'd smiled since being admitted. That boy has an old soul, Eleanor murmured. Sarah smiled, though her eyes remained worried. He does, but I'm concerned about him. He's taking on too much, the horses, these visits, school, helping with his father at home. He's exhausting himself, and now with this weather. As if on cue, the diner's door burst open again. This time, it was Hank Reeves who entered, drenched from the storm. His eyes scanned the diner until they found Sarah. Mrs. Miller, he called, moving toward their table with surprising urgency for a man his age. You need to come with me. It's about your boy and Thunder. The color drained from Sarah's face as she stood abruptly, nearly knocking over her coffee. What happened? Are they hurt? Hank held up his weathered hands in a calming gesture. The boy's fine, Mrs. Miller. But Thunder took a bad step on Willow Creek Bridge. His legs hurt, and he can't walk back. Your son sent me to find you. Sarah grabbed her purse. Where are they? Old Peterson Place, just past the bridge. Ethan wouldn't leave the horse, even though I offered to stay. Stubborn kid you've got. I need to get to them, Sarah said, already moving toward the door. My truck's outside, Hank offered. Harold's gone to get Dr. Reynolds. The veterinarian? Eleanor asked, also standing. I thought Sarah worked at the vet clinic. I'm a technician, not a vet, Sarah explained quickly, and Jim Reynolds knows our horses. If Hank called him, it must be serious. Walter stood as well. We're coming too. Outside, the rain had eased to a steady drizzle, but the damage was done. Streams of water flowed along the gutters, and the dirt roads on the outskirts of town would be mud pits by now. They piled into Hank's mud-splattered pickup, Sarah in the passenger seat, Eleanor and Walter squeezed in the back. As they drove, Sarah fired questions at Hank. What exactly happened? How bad is Thunder's injury? Did Ethan finish his visits? Hank kept his eyes on the road as he navigated around a fallen branch. We were helping him complete his rounds. After we visited Miss Garcia, the young woman with multiple sclerosis, Eleanor interjected. Hank nodded. That's right. Anyway, after her place, Harold called to say Thunder was getting restless at our house. Ethan was worried. That stallion's never liked being separated from him since the accident with your husband. So we cut the route short and went back to get the horses. And then, Sarah prompted, as Hank slowed to maneuver through a particularly deep puddle. Ethan insisted on continuing to the pasture despite the weather. Said something about how the people he visits count on his schedule, and if he breaks it once, he might never get back to it. Hank shook his head. Reminds me of some soldiers I knew. Once they commit to a mission, nothing stops them. That's Ethan, Sarah said softly. We were crossing Willow Creek Bridge when it happened. The wood's old, and with all this rain, one of the planks gave way under Thunder's hoof. He went down hard, caught his back right leg between the boards. Oh, God, Sarah whispered. Your boy kept his head. I'll give him that. Calmed the horse, sent me for help, and started examining the leg himself. Said he'd watched you and Dr. Reynolds enough times to know what to look for. The truck turned onto a muddy side road, bouncing through ruts that had become small ponds in the downpour. After about a quarter mile, they could see the old Peterson farm in the distance, abandoned years ago when the elderly couple moved to Florida. Through the grey curtain of rain, 4 figures were visible near the dilapidated barn. Ethan, Thunder, Harold Reeves, and a man they recognized as Dr. Jim Reynolds. Hank parked as close as he could, and they all scrambled out into the mud. Sarah immediately rushed toward her son, while Eleanor and Walter followed more slowly, trying to stay upright on the slippery ground. Thunder was lying on his side in the shelter of the barn's overhang, his massive black form unnaturally still, except for the heaving of his sides. Ethan knelt by the horse's head, one hand steadily stroking his neck, while the other held an umbrella to keep the rain off. Doctor. Reynolds was examining Thunder's rear leg, his face grave. Mom! Ethan called when he spotted Sarah. The relief in his voice was palpable, though he didn't move from Thunder's side. Sarah knelt in the mud beside her son, quickly assessing the situation with a professional eye, before pulling Ethan into a brief, fierce hug. Are you hurt? I'm fine, Ethan insisted, his attention returning to Thunder. But he's in pain. Mom, Doctor. Reynolds says it might be a fracture. Dr. Reynolds looked up at Sarah's arrival. Tendon damage for sure. Possibly a hairline fracture of the cannon bone. Won't know for certain without x-rays. Can we move him to the clinic? Sarah asked. The vet shook his head. Not safely, not in this condition. I've given him something for the pain, but we need to stabilize that leg before we try to transport him. Eleanor and Walter watched from a respectful distance as the vet continued working, giving Sarah and Ethan quiet instructions. The Reeves brothers moved with surprising efficiency, bringing supplies from the vet's truck and helping to position supports around Thunder's injured leg. And that horse means the world to that family, Walter murmured to Eleanor. It's more than that, Eleanor replied, observing the determined set of Ethan's jaw as he worked alongside the adults. That horse is the last connection to the life they had before the accident. Hank Reeves approached them, his expression unusually vulnerable for a man known for his gruffness. That boy's something special, he said quietly. It reminds me of our brother Michael, same kind heart. I didn't know you had another brother, Eleanor said, surprised. Died in Vietnam, Harold said, joining them. He was the one who could always talk sense into us. After we lost him, well, we lost ourselves too. Until Ethan started bringing the horses by, Walter guessed. Hank nodded. First time I've felt like myself in decades. He looked toward Ethan. He didn't just bring horses to our door. He brought our brother's memory back, the good parts, not just the loss. A soft whiny from Thunder drew their attention back to the scene before them. Dr. Reynolds had finished bandaging the leg and was now discussing something with Sarah in low tones. Ethan remained by the horse's head, whispering reassurances. We need to get him to the clinic, Dr. Reynolds announced, addressing the group. I've called for my large animal trailer, but with these roads, it'll be at least an hour before it gets here. An hour? Ethan protested. He's in pain now. I've given him medication, Ethan, the vet assured him. The best thing we can do is keep him calm and wait. What about Dad? Ethan asked, turning to his mother. He'll be wondering where we are. Sarah's expression tightened. I'll call him. But Ethan, he's going to have to know the truth now. Fear flashed across Ethan's face. Mom, no, it'll break his heart. What's going on here? Eleanor asked, unable to contain her curiosity any longer. Sarah sighed, moving away from Thunder to join them. Matthew doesn't just not know about Ethan's visits with the horses, he doesn't know Ethan's been handling Thunder at all. I don't understand, Walter said. Thunder is the horse that threw Matthew, Sarah explained, lowering her voice so Ethan wouldn't hear. After the accident, Matthew insisted we sell him. He said Thunder was too dangerous, too unpredictable. But you didn't sell him, Eleanor stated. No, Ethan begged us not to. He was convinced that Thunder was spooked by the storm that day, that it wasn't the horse's fault. Matthew eventually agreed to keep the other horses, but he made me promise that Thunder would go. So what did you do? Walter asked. Sarah looked back at her son, still faithfully attending to the injured stallion. I told Matthew that Dr. Reynolds had found Thunder a good home with a family across the county, but the truth is, we kept him. Ethan has been secretly caring for him all this time, convinced that one day his father would be ready to see Thunder again. Sarah stepped away from the group, phone in hand, her shoulders hunched against both the rain and the conversation to come. Eleanor and Walter exchanged concerned glances as they heard her begin, Matthew, there's something I need to tell you. Ethan watched his mother from Thunder's side, worry etched across his young face. The stallion sensed his anxiety, nickering softly despite his own pain. It'll be okay, boy, Ethan whispered, though his voice lacked conviction. Dad will understand. He has to. Dr. Reynolds approached, carrying more supplies from his truck. How's our patient doing? He's scared, Ethan replied, still stroking Thunder's neck. He knows something's wrong. The vet nodded. Horses are intuitive that way. But he trusts you, and that's keeping him calm. You've done good work with him, Ethan. Not many could have rehabilitated a horse after a trauma like the one Thunder experienced. Ethan looked up in surprise. You knew. I'm a veterinarian, son. It's my job to understand animal behavior. That horse threw your father and caused a life-changing injury. Most horses that go through something like that develop lasting anxiety and fear responses. But Thunder here, He gestured to the stallion who, despite his injury, remained calm under Ethan's touch. "He's a different animal than the one I examined after the accident. I just treated him with respect," Ethan said simply. "Showed him he could trust me." "It's more than that," Dr. Reynolds countered. "You've got a gift, Ethan." "The same gift I've been hearing about from half my clients these past months. The elderly ones who suddenly have something to look forward to each morning." Nearby, the Reeves brothers nodded in agreement. "Kids got away with more than just horses," Harold said. Sarah returned to the group, her phone conversation finished. Her face was pale, but there was resolution in her eyes. "Your father's coming," she told Ethan. "Walter's son is bringing him in his truck." "Is he angry?" Ethan asked, his voice small. Sarah knelt beside him in the mud, heedless of her work clothes. "He's upset, yes, but mostly he's worried about you and Thunder." She took a deep breath. "He's been in that wheelchair for 2 years, Ethan, thinking that the horse that put him there was gone. Now he finds out Thunder's been here all along, and that you've been handling him. It's a lot to process. I just couldn't let them take Thunder away," Ethan said, tears welling in his eyes. "It wasn't his fault, Mom. That lightning strike was so close, any horse would have spooked." "I know, honey." Sarah wrapped an arm around his shoulders. "And deep down, I think your father knows that too. That's why he's coming instead of demanding we call the trailer service to take Thunder away immediately." Dr. Reynolds interrupted gently. "The transport trailer should be here within the hour. Once we get Thunder to the clinic, we can take proper x-rays and determine the full extent of the injury." "And if it's as bad as you think?" Sarah asked. The veterinary technician in her needing to know the prognosis, the vet's expression was carefully neutral. "Let's not get ahead of ourselves. One step at a time." The rain had finally stopped, though dark clouds still loomed overhead. In the distance, they heard the sound of a vehicle approaching. Ethan tensed, and Thunder responded to his anxiety with a nervous, whiny, "Easy, boy," Ethan soothed, forcing himself to project a calm he didn't feel. The truck came into view, navigating carefully through the muddy terrain. At the wheel was Jason Jenkins, Walter's son, and beside him, his face set in stone, was Matthew Miller. When the truck stopped, Jason hurried around to help Matthew with his wheelchair, but the injured man waved him off, pointing instead to the collapsible mobility scooter in the truck bed that allowed him more independence on uneven terrain. Once Matthew was situated on the scooter, he approached the scene slowly. His eyes moved from Thunder to Ethan, then to Sarah, before returning to the horse that had changed his life forever. The silence stretched, heavy with unspoken emotions. Finally, Matthew spoke, his voice carefully controlled. "How bad is he hurt?" "Possible fracture, definite tendon damage," Dr. Reynolds replied. "We'll know more once I get him to the clinic." Matthew nodded, then turned to his son. To Ethan, "I need you to explain something to me. All these months, when you were supposedly just taking the horses to pasture, what exactly have you been doing?" Ethan swallowed hard, looking to his mother for support. Sarah nodded encouragingly. "I've been visiting people, Dad," Ethan began, his voice gaining strength as he spoke. "People who are lonely or sick or can't get out much. The horses, they help people feel better." "Like animal therapy," Eleanor interjected, unable to help herself. Matthew's gaze swept over Eleanor and Walter, seemingly noticing them for the first time. "And you two are involved in this how?" "We were just being nosy neighbors," Walter admitted with a sheepish smile. "But what we discovered was something remarkable. Your son has created something special in this town, Matthew." "It wasn't just me," Ethan said quickly. "The horses do all the work, especially Thunder." At the mention of his name, the injured stallion lifted his head slightly. Matthew's eyes were drawn to the movement, and for a long moment, man and horse regarded each other. "He remembers you, Dad," Ethan said softly. "I remember him too," Matthew replied, his voice tight. "I remember the sound of my spine breaking when I hit that rock." Ethan flinched as if struck. "I'm sorry. I know I should have told you, but I couldn't let them take him away. Not when I knew he could be helped." "So instead, you and your mother lied to me for 2 years." Sarah moved to stand beside her husband. "It was wrong, Matthew. I know that. But Ethan believed in Thunder so strongly, and I couldn't bear to take one more thing away from him, not after he'd already lost so much when you were injured." "Lost?" Matthew's voice rose slightly. "I'm still here, Sarah." "Yes, you are," Ethan said firmly, "and so is Thunder, and so are Mr. Winters and Mrs. Henderson and the Reeves brothers and Miss Garcia and all the other people who wait by their windows every morning just to see these horses." He took a shaky breath. "I didn't mean to lie to you, Dad. I just wanted to fix things." "Fix things," Matthew repeated. "After your accident, everyone was so sad all the time. You were angry. Mum was worried. I was—" Ethan struggled to find the words. "I was lost. Then one day, I was walking Thunder past Mr. Winters' house, just trying to get him some exercise without you knowing, and Mr. Winters saw us from his window. He smiled. 'Dad!' Really smiled." Harold Reeves stepped forward. "Your boy has been bringing life back to people who'd forgotten what it felt like to look forward to something. Miller, myself and Hank included. He comes to the assisted living facility every week," a new voice added. Everyone turned to see Diane Reynolds, the facility manager, picking her way through the mud toward them. "My residents mark their calendars waiting for Thursdays. Some of them don't remember their own children's names, but they remember Ethan and the horses." Matthew looked overwhelmed by these testimonials. "I don't understand. Why keep it a secret from me?" "Because of Thunder," Ethan admitted. "I knew you wouldn't let me keep him, and without Thunder, it wouldn't be the same. He's special, Dad. He connects with people who are hurting because he's been hurt too." The words hung in the air, simple yet profound from the mouth of a 12-year-old. Matthew's expression was unreadable as he guided his scooter closer to the injured stallion. Thunder watched him approach, ears forward, but showed no sign of fear or aggression. "Hello, old friend," Matthew said quietly, extending his hand toward the horse. Thunder stretched his neck, nostrils flaring as he caught Matthew's scent. For a heartbeat, no one moved or breathed. Then, gently, Thunder pressed his muzzle into Matthew's palm. Ethan's eyes widened. "Dad, he remembers you." "No," Matthew said, his voice thick with emotion as he stroked the horse's face. "He's forgiven me." The moment between Matthew and Thunder was interrupted by the distant rumble of an engine. Dr. Reynolds looked up. "That'll be the transport trailer." Everyone turned to watch as a large vehicle carefully navigated the muddy road, its sides emblazoned with Pinewood Veterinary Services. Behind the wheel was Dr. Reynolds, Assistant Lisa Chen. "Perfect timing," Dr. Reynolds said, already moving to prepare Thunder for transport. "We need to get him loaded carefully. The sedative I gave him earlier will help, but we'll need all hands on deck." As the trailer maneuvered into position, Matthew remained beside Thunder, his hand still resting on the horse's muzzle. Ethan watched his father with a mixture of hope and uncertainty. "Dad," he ventured, "are you still mad?" Matthew looked at his son, really looked at him perhaps for the first time in months. The boy's clothes were mud-splattered, his hair plastered to his forehead from the rain, dark circles under his eyes, testifying to early mornings and heavy responsibilities. Yet there was a steadiness in his gaze that reminded Matthew of himself before the accident. "I'm not mad, Ethan," he said finally. "I'm processing." There's a lot to take in. I know I should have told you about Thunder. Yes, you should have. Matthew's tone was firm but not harsh. But I'm beginning to understand why you didn't. He gestured to the people gathered around them, the Reeves brothers, Eleanor, Walter, Diane from the assisted living facility, and now others who had arrived after hearing about the situation. Frank Winters, brought by his nephew in a specially equipped van, Abigail Henderson, leaning heavily on her cane, and several residents from Pinewood Assisted Living, bundled against the damp chill. "I had no idea," Matthew murmured, taking in the gathering crowd. "All these people. They're here for Thunder," Ethan explained, "and for you, too." Matthew looked surprised. "For me?" Frank Winters, nephew, wheeled him closer. "Your boy has been telling us about you for months, Miller, about your service, your medals, about how you taught him everything he knows about horses. The way he handles those animals," Harold Reeves added, "that comes from good teaching, your teaching." Matthew seemed at a loss for words, his eyes moving from face to face in the crowd, many of whom he hadn't seen or spoken to in the 2 years since his accident. "We've been organizing something," Mrs. Henderson said, her arthritic fingers gripping her cane tightly. "A benefit?" "For your family. A benefit," Sarah repeated, clearly as surprised as her husband. "What kind of benefit?" "A fundraiser," Diane explained. "The residents at Pinewood have been making crafts to sell. Frank has been reaching out to his military connections. The Reeves brothers are donating that piece of land they own adjacent to your property." "What?" Matthew looked to the twins in shock. "That land must be worth not as much as what your boy has given us," Hank cut him off gruffly. "Besides, it connects to your back pasture. Makes more sense for you to have it for the horses." "We can't accept that," Sarah protested. "You don't have much choice," Harold said with a hint of his old stubbornness. "Papers are already being drawn up." Dr. Reynolds cleared his throat. "This reunion is touching, but we need to move Thunder now." The trailers in position. The next few minutes were a flurry of coordinated activity as everyone worked together to help the injured horse. Dr. Reynolds administered another mild sedative, and under his guidance, they carefully positioned a specialized sling under Thunder's body. "On my count," the vet instructed. 1, 2, 3, lift!" With a collective grunt of effort, they raised Thunder just enough for Matthew to guide his scooter beneath the suspended sling, positioning himself near the horse's head. "I've got him," Matthew assured his son, who looked anxious. "He knows me." And indeed, despite the pain and the strange situation, Thunder remained calm, his eyes fixed on Matthew as the group slowly guided him toward the trailer's ramp. "Easy, does it?" Matthew murmured, one hand on Thunder's halter, the other controlling his scooter. "One step at a time, just like my physical therapy. We're in this together now, old friend." Ethan walked alongside, ready to assist if needed, but his father and Thunder seemed to have established a rhythm, a mutual understanding born from their shared experience of injury and recovery. As they reached the trailer, Matthew hesitated. "I'm coming with him," he announced. "Matthew, are you sure?" Sarah asked. "I need to do this, Sarah, for Thunder, for Ethan." His eyes met his wife's. "And for me." Dr. Reynolds nodded. "There's room in the trailer for your scooter, if that's what you're asking." With careful maneuvering, they got Thunder settled in the trailer, with Matthew positioned securely beside him. "I'm coming too," Ethan insisted, already climbing aboard before anyone could object. Sarah looked like she might protest, then relented. "I'll follow in the car." As the doors closed on father, son, and horse, Eleanor found herself unexpectedly emotional. "Well," she said to Walter, blinking back tears, "I certainly didn't expect our morning adventure to end like this." "It's not ending," Walter replied, watching as the trailer carefully began its journey toward town. I think for the Miller family, something is just beginning. The waiting room of Pinewood Veterinary Clinic had never been so crowded. What began as a small group had grown as word spread through the town's efficient grapevine. Sarah sat between Eleanor and Walter, anxiously watching the door that led to the large animal treatment area where Thunder, Matthew, and Ethan had disappeared with Dr. Reynolds 2 hours ago. Shouldn't we have heard something by now? She murmured, checking her watch for the dozenth time. These things take time, Eleanor reassured her. Especially with injuries as complex as Thunder's. The Reeves brothers stood stoically by the window, occasionally exchanging quiet words. Frank Winters had positioned his wheelchair near the clinic's front desk, deep in conversation with Abigail Henderson about their shared experiences with Ethan's morning visits. That boy gave me something to look forward to, Frank was saying. After Clara died, I didn't have much reason to get up in the morning. Then Ethan started bringing those horses by. I know exactly what you mean, Abigail nodded. The arthritis in my hands got so bad I had to give up playing piano. Darkest time of my life, losing music. But when Ethan brings Luna to my fence and I can run my fingers through her mane, she demonstrated with her gnarled hands. Sonny, it's the closest thing to playing Chopin I've felt in years. Music therapy and animal therapy, remarked Diane from the assisted living facility. Ethan stumbled onto something medical professionals have been studying for decades. The clinic door opened, and Principal Davis from Pinewood Middle School entered, looking concerned. He spotted Sarah and approached her. Mrs. Miller, I just heard. I was worried when Ethan didn't come to school and wasn't answering his phone. I'm sorry, I should have called, Sarah said, rubbing her temples. Everything happened so fast. No apology necessary, the principal assured her. I understand completely. In fact, he hesitated, then continued. I've been meaning to speak with you and your husband about Ethan's morning activities. Several teachers have noticed his occasional fatigue in class. Sarah tensed. He's never neglected his schoolwork. That's just it, Principal Davis said, sitting down beside her. His grades are excellent. His science teacher, Ms. Chen, tells me he's been using his experiences with the horses for his research project on therapeutic animal interactions. He's even been collecting data from the people he visits. Data? Sarah looked surprised. Pulse rates, mood assessments, cognitive improvements in dementia patients. Ms. Chen says it's graduate-level research methodology. She's been helping him design proper surveys. I had no idea, Sarah admitted, a mixture of pride and concern washing over her face. He's been doing all this on top of everything else. That's why I'm here, the principal continued. We want to formalize Ethan's project as an independent study. Give him academic credit for what he's already doing. It might also allow for a more flexible morning schedule. Before Sarah could respond, the door to the treatment area swung open. Dr. Reynolds emerged, looking tired but not defeated. The room fell silent as everyone turned toward him expectantly. The good news, the vet announced, is that there's no fracture. The X-rays show severe tendon damage, but nothing that won't heal with proper care and time. A collective sigh of relief swept through the room. Sarah rose to her feet. Can I see them? Dr. Reynolds nodded. Of course. Thunder's sedated but stable. Your husband and son are still with him. They haven't left his side. Sarah followed the vet through the door, leaving the others to share their relief and speculate about Thunder's recovery. Inside the treatment area, the scene before Sarah took her breath away. Thunder lay on a large padded mat, his injured leg carefully bandaged and elevated. Beside him, Matthew had positioned his scooter so he could lean against the wall while maintaining physical contact with the horse, one hand resting on Thunder's neck. Ethan sat cross-legged on the floor on Thunder's other side, his fingers gently stroking the stallion's forelock. Father and son looked up as Sarah entered, both showing signs of emotional and physical exhaustion, but their eyes held something she hadn't seen in a long time, a shared purpose. "He's going to be okay, Mom," Ethan said immediately. "Dr. Reynolds says with proper rehabilitation, he'll make a full recovery." "That's wonderful news," Sarah said, moving to join them. She knelt beside Matthew, placing a hand on his arm. "Otto, how are you holding up?" Matthew's eyes, red-rimmed from what might have been tears, met hers. "I'm okay, better than okay, actually." He glanced at Thunder, then back to his wife. "Sarah, I owe you and Ethan an apology." "No, we're the ones who—" Matthew shook his head, cutting her off gently. "Please, let me say this. After the accident, I was so consumed by what I'd lost that I couldn't see what I still had. I blamed Thunder because it was easier than accepting that accidents just happen sometimes, and His voice broke slightly. "I've been so wrapped up in my own struggles that I didn't see what Ethan was going through, what you were going through." "Dad, it's okay," Ethan began, but Matthew continued. "It's not okay, son. You've been carrying burdens no 12-year-old should have to carry. Taking care of the horses, worrying about finances, trying to help people around town who needed it, all while keeping secrets because you were afraid of hurting my feelings." Ethan looked down, stroking Thunder's mane. "I just wanted to help. After your accident, I felt so helpless. Then I saw how Mr. Winters responded to Willow, and suddenly I had something I could do, something that mattered." "It matters more than you know," Matthew said. "I've been talking with your principal. He tells me you've been collecting data on the effects of your visits." Ethan's head shot up, his expression a mix of surprise and embarrassment. "Miss Chen was helping me. I wanted to prove that the horses were really making a difference, not just making people temporarily happy." "And what have you found?" Sarah asked, genuinely curious. "The data's preliminary," Ethan replied, slipping into what sounded like a practiced presentation voice. "But we're seeing improved mood stability in the assisted living residents, decreased pain perception in arthritis patients like Mrs. Henderson, and reduced anxiety in PTSD sufferers like the Reeves brothers and Mr. Winters." Matthew stared at his son in amazement. "When did you get so grown up?" Ethan shrugged, suddenly self-conscious. "I'm still just a kid, Dad." "No," Matthew said firmly, "you're extraordinary. And it's time I started being the father you deserve." He looked at Sarah. "The father and husband you both deserve." Thunder stirred slightly, nickering softly in his sedated state. Matthew immediately turned his attention back to the horse, his hand moving soothingly along the animal's neck. "It's okay, boy," he murmured. "Now we're going to get through this together." Dr. Reynolds re-entered the room, clipboard in hand. "We need to discuss Thunder's recovery plan," he said. "It's going to require daily care, specialized exercises, and monitoring." "Whatever he needs," Matthew said without hesitation. "The good news is that horses are remarkably resilient, especially with proper care. I'm recommending at least 3 months of rehabilitation before he bears his full weight on that leg. 3 months. Ethan looked crestfallen. "But what about our morning visits? Everyone will be so disappointed." Matthew and Sarah exchanged a look, some unspoken understanding passing between them. "I think," Matthew said slowly, "that we might need to reimagine those visits, at least until Thunder recovers." "But that doesn't mean they have to stop entirely." "What do you mean?" Ethan asked. Matthew smiled, the first genuine smile Sarah had seen from him in months. "I mean, maybe it's time your old man got back in the saddle. Metaphorically speaking, for now. Those other 3 horses still need exercise, and I could use some fresh air and purpose. The hope that bloomed on Ethan's face was like the sun breaking through storm clouds. Really? You'd come with me? If you'll have me, Matthew replied. I think it's time I met all these people you've been helping. Time I started being part of the solution instead of wallowing in the problem. Ethan launched himself at his father, nearly toppling the scooter as he wrapped his arms around Matthew's neck. Oh, that would be awesome. Dad! Sarah watched them, tears welling in her eyes, as husband and son embraced for what felt like the first time in years. Behind them, even in his sedated state, Thunder seemed to sense the shift in energy, his ears twitching forward toward the sound of their voices. 3 weeks later, the early morning mist still clung to the fields as Matthew guided his specialized all-terrain wheelchair alongside Willow. The chair, a recent acquisition thanks to an anonymous donor from the veterans group Frank Winters had contacted, allowed Matthew newfound independence outdoors. Beside him, Ethan led Luna and Scout, the 3 of them creating a now familiar sight on Maple Street. Mr. Winters will be waiting, Ethan reminded his father, checking his watch. Matthew nodded, adjusting his course. I remember the schedule. The past 3 weeks had transformed the Miller family in ways none of them could have anticipated. Thunder remained at the veterinary clinic, receiving specialized care, but his prognosis improved daily. Matthew and Ethan visited him every afternoon after school, often joining Dr. Reynolds for the stallion's therapy sessions. Meanwhile, the morning visits had resumed with the remaining 3 horses, but with a significant difference. Matthew was now an integral part of the routine. What had once been Ethan's solitary mission had become a family endeavor. As they approached Frank Winters' Blue House, Matthew felt a familiar tightening in his chest. Despite their shared military background, he had avoided Frank after his own injury, unable to face another veteran who had adapted to life with a disability. He's excited to talk to you, Ethan said, sensing his father's hesitation. He keeps saying he can't believe he's been missing out on your war stories all this time. Matthew managed to smile. It's not the war stories that matter, he said quietly. It's everything that comes after. Frank was already at his window, face brightening as he spotted them. Unlike previous visits, however, he gestured toward his front door, which swung open to reveal his nephew. Uncle Frank wants to know if you have time to come inside today, the young man called. He's made coffee. Ethan looked at his father, silently deferring to his decision. We'd be honored, Matthew replied, guiding his chair toward the ramp that Frank's nephew had installed years ago. A ramp Matthew now realized had rarely been used because Frank so seldom had visitors. Inside, the house was meticulously neat, but showed signs of a life largely lived in isolation. A single chair positioned by the window, a TV tray with remnants of a solitary breakfast, walls covered with military commendations and fading photographs. Frank maneuvered his wheelchair to the kitchen table, where 4 mugs waited. Hope you don't mind that I presumed, he said, a hint of nervousness in his gruff voice. Been a while since I entertained. It's perfect, Matthew assured him, positioning his chair at the table. But Ethan and I need to keep to his schedule. These visits mean a lot to people. That they do, Frank agreed, pouring coffee for the adults and hot chocolate for Ethan. That boy of yours has brought life back to half the forgotten folks in this town. Ethan busied himself, looking out the window at the horses, clearly uncomfortable with the praise. I've been meaning to thank you properly, Frank continued, addressing Matthew directly. What he's been doing, it matters, especially to those of us who served. Matthew nodded, understanding the unspoken weight behind Frank's words. Oh, I'm only beginning to realize how much. Their conversation flowed easily from there, touching on shared experiences both in the military and in adjusting to life in a wheelchair. Before they knew it, 15 minutes had passed. "We should get moving," Ethan said, checking his watch. Frank walked them to the door, or rather, wheeled alongside them. "Same time tomorrow." "Count on it," Matthew replied, feeling a connection he hadn't expected. "And maybe next time, you could tell me about that bronze star I spotted on your wall." A ghost of a smile crossed Frank's weathered face. "Only if you'll tell me how you earned those Rangers tabs." As they continued their route, Matthew found himself seeing the town through new eyes. Houses he'd passed hundreds of times before his accident now revealed stories he'd never noticed. The carefully positioned chair by Mrs. Henderson's window, the bird feeder, precisely angled for viewing from Mr. Peterson's bed, the extra-wide mailbox installed for Miss Garcia's limited mobility. "You've really thought about everything, haven't you?" he asked his son as they approached the assisted living facility. Ethan shrugged. It wasn't hard to figure out. People just want to feel connected, you know, like they still matter. The wisdom in those simple words struck Matthew deeply. Wasn't that exactly what he had been missing since his accident? The feeling that he still mattered. At the assisted living facility, they were greeted like celebrities. Residents who had been merely names in Ethan's stories now became real to Matthew, each with their own history, their own struggles, and their own joy at seeing the horses and their handlers. "Now you must be the famous Matthew Miller," said an elderly woman in a wheelchair, her eyes twinkling as she offered Scout an apple slice. "Your son has told us so much about you. I hear you're quite the horseman yourself." Matthew found himself unexpectedly touched. "I was once. I'm learning to be again, in a different way." "Different doesn't mean lesser, young man," she replied, with the authority of someone who had lived long enough to know. "It just means you have new stories to tell." By the time they reached the Reeves brothers' property, Matthew's perspective had shifted dramatically. The burden of self-pity that had weighed him down for 2 years felt lighter somehow, contextualized by the resilience he'd witnessed in person after person along their route. Harold and Hank were waiting as usual, but today they had company, an older woman Matthew didn't recognize and a young man in a business suit. "Right on time," Harold called, waving them over. "Miller, this is our sister-in-law, Margaret, Michael's widow, and this is her son, our nephew, James Reeves. He's a lawyer down in Richmond." Handshakes were exchanged as Ethan tended to the horses, giving them water from the trough the brothers had installed specifically for these visits. "James has the paperwork for the land transfer," Hank explained without preamble. "Thought we might as well get it over with." "I still don't feel right accepting," Matthew began, but Margaret cut him off with a gentle firmness. "And my husband would have wanted this," she said. "Hank and Harold have talked of nothing else since your boy started bringing those horses around. It's brought Michael back to them in a way nothing else has." James opened his briefcase. "The deed is ready to sign. The land has been legally subdivided, and all the paperwork is in order." He looked at Matthew. "My uncles can be stubborn when they set their minds to something. Trust me, it's easier to accept graciously." Matthew looked to the elderly twins, who stood with uncharacteristic vulnerability in their weathered faces. "Thank you," he said simply. "We'll make good use of it." "See that you do," Hank replied gruffly, though his eyes betrayed his emotion. "That's prime grazing land." As the legal documents were signed, Matthew couldn't help but marvel at how Thunder's injury had set in motion a chain of events that was healing wounds far deeper than physical ones. Afterward, as they continued to the community pasture to let the horses graze before heading home, Ethan was uncharacteristically quiet. "Everything okay, son?" Matthew asked. Ethan nodded, then hesitated. I was just thinking about Thunder. Do you think he's lonely at the clinic? Dr. Reynolds says he's doing well. His therapy is progressing ahead of schedule. I know, but Ethan kicked at a stone in the path. He's used to being with the other horses, used to our routine. Matthew considered this. You might be right. Maybe we should talk to Dr. Reynolds about bringing him home sooner. We could convert part of the barn into a recovery stall. Really? Ethan's face lit up. You'd want that? Of course, Matthew replied, surprised by his son's reaction. Thunder's family, and family belongs together, especially during recovery. He smiled ruefully. But that's something I should have remembered sooner. They reached the pasture gate, and as Ethan removed the halters from Willow, Luna, and Scout, Matthew watched the horses trot happily into the open field. The sight stirred something in him, a feeling of rightness, of connection to the life he'd had before, and the new life that was emerging from the wreckage of the accident. Dad. Ethan's voice interrupted his thoughts. What are you thinking about? Matthew turned to his son, seeing in him the future of everything they'd built. I'm thinking it's time to make some changes. Good ones. What kind of changes? Well, for starters, Matthew said, I think it's time we officially register you and these horses as a therapy team. Make it legitimate with training, certification, the works. Ethan's eyes widened. Do you mean, like, professionally? Exactly like that. Dr. Reynolds has contacts with equine therapy programs across the state, and Principal Davis already told your mother he'd support giving you academic credit. We could turn your data collection into a proper research study. But what about the cost? Mom's always worried about money, and certification programs are expensive. Matthew smiled. Let me worry about that. I've been making some calls. There are grants available for veterans starting small businesses, and with the community behind us. He gestured toward town, where posters announcing the upcoming benefit for the Miller family had appeared in every shop window. You really think we could do it? Ethan asked, a mixture of hope and disbelief in his voice. Son, after what I've seen these past weeks, what you've built, the lives you've touched, I have no doubt at all. Matthew reached out, clasping his son's shoulder. You found your purpose. Now it's time I found mine again. As they turned for home, the first rays of morning sun broke through the dissipating mist, illuminating the path ahead. 6 months later, the Miller property had undergone a transformation that mirrored the changes in the family itself. A new sign hung at the entrance, Healing Hooves Equine Therapy Center, with the subtitle, Where Horses Help Heal. The barn had been renovated and expanded onto the formerly Reeves-owned land, with specialized equipment for both the horses and their human visitors. A small covered arena allowed for sessions regardless of weather, and a wheelchair-accessible mounting ramp made it possible for riders of all abilities to participate. On this particular Saturday morning, the center was hosting its first official open house. Cars lined the driveway and spilled onto the shoulder of the road as townspeople and visitors from neighboring communities came to see what had become the talk of the county. Inside the arena, Ethan stood in the center, demonstrating basic techniques with Willow to an attentive audience. Despite his youth, he carried himself with the confidence of someone who knew his purpose. Beside him, Miss Chen from the science department took notes, documenting the session for the research study that had grown from Ethan's initial data collection. And the key to equine therapy, Ethan was explaining, isn't just putting someone on a horse. It's about creating a connection between horse and human that builds trust, confidence, and emotional well-being. As if on cue, Willow gently nuzzled Ethan's shoulder, eliciting appreciative laughter from the crowd. Outside, Sarah guided visitors through the facility, pointing out features and explaining the program's mission. She had reduced her hours at the veterinary clinic to serve as the center's administrator, a role that utilized her medical knowledge while allowing her to be part of the family business. "We currently serve 27 regular clients," she told a group of potential donors. "From children with autism to veterans with PTSD, our horses provide therapeutic benefits that traditional treatments alone often can't achieve." Near the paddock, Eleanor and Walter observed the proceedings with the satisfaction of proud grandparents, though they had no biological connection to the Millers. "To think this all started because you were being nosy," Walter teased his friend. Eleanor sniffed indignantly. "I prefer the term community-minded, and look what came of it. Indeed, the transformation was remarkable. The once struggling Miller family had found not just financial stability, but a renewed sense of purpose that united them. The community itself seemed revitalized, with previously isolated residents now regularly gathering at the center as volunteers or participants." Matthew was in the main paddock, demonstrating Thunder's remarkable recovery to Frank Winters and several other veterans from his newly formed support group. The stallion moved with only the slightest hint of his previous injury, a testament to both excellent veterinary care and the daily rehabilitation exercises Matthew had diligently performed. The best part of Thunder's therapy," Matthew was saying as he guided the horse through a series of gentle maneuvers, "was that it coincided with my own. We healed together." Frank nodded, understanding the layers of meaning in those simple words. The Veterans Support Group, which met weekly at the center, had become a lifeline for many former service members who had previously been isolated by their physical or emotional wounds. "Miller's got a gift," Harold Reeves remarked to his brother as they watched from their usual spot by the fence. "Almost as good with the horses as his boy." "Different gift," Hank corrected. "The boy connects with the animals. The father connects with the people who need the animals." In the small office adjacent to the barn, Abigail Henderson sat at a desk, her arthritic fingers moving slowly but purposefully across a keyboard. Despite her advanced age, she had volunteered to help with the center's administrative tasks, finding new purpose in managing the website and social media accounts that chronicled the center's activities. "Mrs. Henderson, could you post these photos from yesterday's session with the assisted living residents?" Diane from the facility asked, handing over a memory card. "The families love seeing their progress." Abigail nodded, taking the card with a smile. "Did you see Mr. Grayson? He remembered my name yesterday, first time in 2 years." "I saw," Diane confirmed. His daughter cried when he recognized her too. These small victories were celebrated throughout the center. A dementia patient who recalled a memory, a child with autism who made eye contact, a veteran who slept through the night without nightmares after a session with the horses. As noon approached, Matthew called everyone to gather in the covered arena for a special announcement. The crowd formed a semicircle, with the 4 horses, Thunder, Willow, Luna, and Scout, standing proudly alongside the Miller family. "First, Sarah, Ethan, and I want to thank everyone who made this possible," Matthew began, his voice carrying easily through the space. "From Dr. Reynolds, who saved Thunder and guided our certification process, to the Reeves brothers, who donated the land, to every volunteer and donor who believed in this vision." Applause rippled through the crowd. Matthew waited for it to subside before continuing. "Today, I'm pleased to announce that Healing Hooves has received official accreditation from the Professional Association of Therapeutic Horsemanship. This certification allows us to expand our services and accept insurance for many of our programs. Another round of applause, louder this time, with a few cheers mixed in. But more importantly, Matthew continued, we've received a grant from the Veterans Administration to provide free services to returning service members and their families. He nodded toward Frank Winters. And Frank was instrumental in making this happen. The elderly veteran ducked his head modestly, though his eyes shone with pride. And finally, Matthew said, I'd like to introduce our newest staff member, who will be joining us full-time next month after she completes her certification. He gestured toward a young woman standing nearby. Ms. Garcia has been one of our regular visitors since Ethan first started bringing the horses to her home. Despite her multiple sclerosis, she's become an exceptional rider and an inspiration to all of us. She'll be heading our program for clients with physical disabilities. Lisa Garcia moved forward, leaning on her cane, but standing straighter than she had in years. When Ethan first brought Scout to my window, she said, her voice steady despite her emotion, I hadn't left my house in 3 months. I was convinced my life was over at 32. Now, she gestured to the center around her, I have purpose again, and I want to help others find theirs. As the formal presentations concluded and guests dispersed to enjoy the refreshments provided by the ladies' auxiliary, Ethan found a quiet moment with Thunder. He stroked the stallion's strong neck, remembering the fear he'd felt on that rainy day when the horse had been injured. You did good, boy, he murmured. Really good. You both did, his father said, joining him. Matthew's specialized wheelchair now sported custom modifications that allowed him to work directly with the horses, including a raising mechanism that brought him to standing height when needed. Ethan smiled at his father. And I never thought it would turn into all this. That's the thing about acts of kindness, Matthew replied, looking out over the bustling center that had grown from his son's simple morning routine. You never know how far the ripples will spread. Sarah joined them, slipping her arm around Matthew's shoulders. Principal Davis is here. He says your research project has been accepted for the state science competition. Ethan's eyes widened. Seriously, that's awesome. He also mentioned something about a scholarship program for students interested in veterinary medicine or therapeutic riding, Sarah added, exchanging a knowing look with Matthew. Their moment was interrupted by Eleanor Thompson, who approached with her usual purposeful stride, Walter trailing behind her. There you are, she announced. I've been looking everywhere for you, young man. Is something wrong, Mrs. Thompson? Ethan asked. Wrong, certainly not. She drew herself up importantly. The town council met yesterday, and we've decided to feature Healing Hooves in this year's Founders' Day parade. You'll lead the procession with the horses. The whole town wants to celebrate what you've built here, Walter added. It's not every day a 12-year-old. 13 now, Ethan corrected with a grin. A 13-year-old changes an entire community. As Eleanor detailed the parade plans, Ethan caught his father's eye. They shared a look of understanding that went beyond words, acknowledgement of how far they'd come, and appreciation for the journey that had brought them here. Later that evening, after the visitors had gone and the center was quiet, the Miller family stood together at the paddock fence, watching the 4 horses grazing peacefully in the golden light of sunset. Thunder raised his head, nickering softly in recognition before returning to his grass. I was thinking, Matthew said, breaking the comfortable silence, about what you told me Thunder's name used to be before we bought him. Thundercloud, Ethan recalled, because of the grey patch on his flank that looks like a storm cloud. Matthew nodded. Fitting in a way, storms bring rain, destruction sometimes, but they also clear the air, make way for new growth. Sarah leaned her head against her husband's shoulder. Poetic. And here I thought I married a practical man. I've learned a few things from our son, Matthew replied, ruffling Ethan's hair affectionately. And do you like how sometimes the longest route turns out to be the best one? Ethan looked out at the horses, at the expanded property with its new facilities, and finally at his parents, his mother standing tall and confident, his father sitting straight in the wheelchair that no longer defined him, but simply served him. I think, Ethan said thoughtfully, Thunder knew what he was doing all along. As if in agreement, the stallion raised his head once more, silhouetted against the setting sun, strong, healed, and free, much like the family who had found their way back to each other through an unexpected journey of healing and hope.